startups are ultimately all about action. Attention leads to intention, and intention leads to action.
Building a product is incredibly hard, but getting anyone to give a shit about it is even harder, and that means they need to notice you.
To get attention for the idea, you will also have to get attention for yourself. People care about the individuals behind the products that they love.
Some founders will look at people who are showy, who are attention-seeking, who stand out, and they go, well, I don't want that. I don't want to speak for myself, sell myself.
It's never actually about you. It's about building attention for your ideas. And that's a very noble and worthy thing. That's something that Susan Cain taught me when I interviewed her.
Most people, they'll spend their 4 seconds of attention on you, and unless something really resonates with them, they'll move on to the next thing. People are looking for reasons to reject you.
You want to be sticky.
You're listening to the Startup Podcast. This is an educational episode, in-depth masterclasses about the concepts essential to building, running, and investing in Silicon Valley-style startups. Whether you're a founder, investor, or operator in a startup, you'll gain insights into the principles that power high-growth disruption, the same way Facebook, Google, and Uber do it. The conversation starts now.
Hey, I'm Chris Saad.
And I'm Yaniv Bernstein.
And I'm Ben Parr.
Welcome to today's episode of the Startup Podcast. On today's show, we're going to talk about the difficult but important subject of attention. What is it? What's it good for? How can you get it? How can you keep it? And how can you use it to supercharge your career and your startup? We also have special guest Ben Parr, who literally wrote the book on attention. So all of that and more right after the break. Stay tuned.
Whether you're starting or scaling your company's security program, demonstrating top-notch security practices and establishing trust is more important than ever. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. And it gets even better. Just for TSP listeners, you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's vanta.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
So, Yaniv, before we get into the show, we've got to talk about the Startup Podcast Pact, which of course says, if you've heard a few of our episodes and gotten value, we ask you to please tell your friends about us on your favorite social network, subscribe to us in your favorite podcasting app, and now subscribe to us on YouTube. The algorithm's starting to like us. It helps us grow the show and help more founders just like you. All right, on today's show, we're going to talk about attention. This is a really interesting topic because it's ill-defined. It's not exactly clear why you should go out there and seek attention. Some founders are afraid of seeking attention. They might feel like it's tall poppy syndrome, or that it's showy, or that it's a waste of time. We're also going to talk about why it's really, really hard to get attention and how to keep attention. And then finally, tips for getting that attention and using it effectively in your startup. We're also going to talk about really bad traps that you can fall into when seeking, getting, keeping, and using attention. In order to help us out on this episode, we have invited our friend Ben Parr. Welcome, Ben. He's an old friend of mine, an acclaimed author, entrepreneur, and journalist known for his tenure as editor-in-large at Mashable, with a key eye for the intersections of technology, media, and business. Ben's co-founded several successful startups, including Octane AI, a leading platform for conversational commerce. And he's also the author of Captivology, The Science of Capturing People's Attention, which is a best-selling book that explores the psychology and science behind gaining and retaining attention. So we thought it'd be awesome to bring him on the show for this one. Ben, thanks for joining us. It's good to see you, my old friend.
Thanks for having me. Don't forget, too, now I'm a VC as well, writing some checks into AI companies.
So if you're an AI startup and you're looking to raise money, then I guess they should talk to you, Ben. What's the name of your fund?
Theory Forge. Think of startups as founders having a theory about how the world works and using their startup to forge it into reality. So we're looking at that early stage.
There you go. Tip number one for getting and keeping attention is make sure the plug for your VC fund happens at the beginning of the podcast episode you've been invited to. Well done. This is a demonstration in live. All right, guys, before we jump into getting and keeping and wielding attention, the first obvious question is, what is attention in this context? And Yaniv, you mentioned the phrase, the prime mover. Why is it the prime mover?
There's this old slogan that you hear, it's first time founders obsess about product and second time founders obsess about distribution. There's this naive idea, they call it the field of dreams fallacy, right? That if you build a great product, they will come, and they will not come. the actual hard bit, building a product is incredibly hard, but getting anyone to give a shit about it is even harder. And that means they need to notice you, right? So attention, I guess you could say, is getting people to turn their mental focus onto you long enough to consider actually using your product or funding your startup or joining your company or anything, right? So in a sense, before anything happens at your startup, and again, this is way beyond pitching, this is everything. Before anything happens, people need to notice you exist. It's often not thought of that way, but the core thing that kicks anything off in a startup in much of life, I won't say everything, but in much of life, is getting noticed, getting someone else's attention. And so once you've been doing it for a while, you realize that, but it's a mistake, a common mistake that first-time founders make, is thinking that getting people's attention is not important. And that's why you get all these founders in stealth and this and that, as if people are clamoring to find out what they're doing. The fact is no one gives a shit, right? So it's like you actually need to get people's attention for good things to happen.
I'll give you a simpler definition from the years I spent researching Captivology. For those who don't know, I interviewed 50 of the world's top PhDs in attention and memory, and interviewed what I call the masters of attention. People like Sheryl Sandberg, Steven Soderbergh, the director, David Copperfield, the magician, Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Super Mario, one of my favorite interviews out of the bunch, to really get an understanding of what attention is. At the fundamental core, attention is memory. What does that mean? It means if someone doesn't remember what you said or what you did, they didn't pay attention. And it's as simple as that. Your job as a founder is for people to remember you, remember your company, remember the one key important thing. You're pitching investors, they have to remember who you are and why your company is special. If you're pitching to prospective customers, they have to remember your value prop, and they have to remember why they should go and care and why they should buy your software. And so attention is directly linked to memory. And I talk about in the book what I call the 3 stages of attention. So attention isn't like an on-off switch. You pay attention, you don't pay attention. It builds up gradually, kind of like a bonfire where you start out with the ignition and then you go to the kindling and then you build a big bonfire. I divide attention into immediate attention, short attention, and long attention. Immediate attention is the 0 to 1, like someone does not know about you and then they know about you. Or even just the more raw example, you automatically pay attention if you hear the sound of a gunshot or a horrible smell because it's a reflex. And then you talk about short attention, which is like the pitch deck. Someone like actually listening to the pitch for 5 minutes and remembering what you said. And then long attention is the long-term memory, like someone actually like remembers you consistently. You come top of mind when, someone asks you like, what's a great startup in this area? Apple has long-term attention. People will just naturally go buy a new Apple product because they built up attention over the course of decades. Your goal is to have people like actually remember you, because from the perspective of investors, we get pitched 1,000 times. It's really hard to remember who and what sometimes. And the ones that get funded are the ones that are memorable. Same thing when you're pitching customers. If they're doing the research or like talking to a whole bunch of vendors and they can't remember you, you're not going to win the deal. You're not going to be able to build a large company and return money to your investors.
And if it's not obvious already, right, attention leads to intention, and intention leads to action. And startups are ultimately all about action. To get somebody to sign a check, to sign up, to use your product, to purchase your product, to retain on your product. That's what you need people to do. You need to change their behavior, change their habits, which all, as we've been saying, starts with attention, moves to intention to buy, intention to engage, and then the actual act of doing so. Before we get into how do you go capture and keep and use this attention, I thought it would be really interesting to discuss that actually some founders, and I think particularly founders in a country like Australia, for example, are sometimes a little bit shy of or derisive of attention. They kind of will look at people who are showy, who are attention-seeking, who stand out, and they go, well, I don't want that. I don't want to speak for myself, sell myself, be too visible. And these people are attention seekers, and they say that in a derisive way. So before we get into why it's hard and how to get it and how to use it, let's just deal with the psychology that some people have that attention is potentially bad or to be avoided. Ben, did you think about this? Did you tap into this in your book, or do you have any thoughts about people you run into in this mindset?
The second interview I did for Captivology was a woman named Susan Cain. Susan Cain is the best-selling author of Quiet, which is the Bible for introverts. It's about the power of introversion. And I interviewed her for the book because I didn't want to write a book for extroverts or frankly, an entrepreneur out of Silicon Valley is going to more naturally be okay with courting attention. It's part of American culture in some ways, but internationally, and frankly, anyone who's an introvert, it does not come as naturally. And she told me while I interviewed her, like, is it okay to court attention as an introvert? You know, her words to be is attention is essential to building a cause or building an idea. What I think she was meaning was like, you as an entrepreneur have a cause that you are championing. Your baby, your startup lives or dies by your ability to champion it. You don't necessarily have to go and just get attention for yourself. Your goal is to get attention for your cause, for your idea, for your startup. If you truly believe that your startup will make people's lives better, will make lives easier, then you should want the idea to get attention. Now, to get attention for the idea, you will also have to get attention for yourself. The reason for that being humans are naturally really, really bad at identifying with companies and with inanimate objects, and are incredibly good with identifying with individual humans. And I actually cite studies about this where if you tell a story about statistics about like how many people are starving in Africa, people don't donate as much money as if you tell an individual story about an individual girl and her struggles to eat and live on a daily basis. People resonate more with individuals. This is why there's a whole PR effort for Mark Zuckerberg, for example, having him, I don't know if you saw, he was surfing. The best PR, his PR team right now is tier 1. For those who didn't see, he's like surfing, wearing a full tuxedo with like a drink in his hand or something. People like care about the individuals behind the products that they love. And so you have to be an advocate for that. You don't have to go out every day, like go into like a suit and like go surfing and like go paragliding or whatever. But you need to bring attention to your ideas because, as you just said, like there's just so many things and attention is limited. We have the exact same amount of attention as we had 4,000 years ago, and yet we have a billion more things vying for our attention. And I think I had a study in my book, which came out years ago, about just like the average human is exposed to just hundreds of gigabytes worth of information daily. How are we supposed to remember anything in that kind of soup? And for a founder trying to bring attention to an idea, it's doubly as hard versus if you're trying to build a company 100 years ago. Easier when there's less competition. So, short version, yes, you have to bring attention. And it's not about yourself. It's about if your cause is worthy, you want as many people paying attention to it in the same way that you'd want people paying attention to your favorite charity. It's never actually about you. It's about building attention for your ideas. And that's a very noble and worthy thing. That's something that Susan Cain taught me when I interviewed her.
I love that, Ben. And one of the things that's always struck me is that when we talk about attention, we talk about paying attention, right? It's like paying money. And perhaps as an introvert myself who comes from a less self-promoting culture, like one of the things I've viewed attention as this type of currency, right? And that was sort of one of the other points I wanted to discuss in this episode is the deflationary nature of attention. For those who follow along with the world of crypto, one of the things with Bitcoin that arguably makes it unsuitable as a currency, but makes it perhaps useful as a speculative asset is the fixed supply. So what happens is when you have a fixed supply of something and growing demand, then the value of that something keeps going up and up, right? Because there's no ability to increase the supply. And that's sort of what's happened with Bitcoin, right? More and more people want Bitcoin. The first known transaction for Bitcoin was 10,000 Bitcoin for a pizza. That would now be worth hundreds of billions of dollars. It's been massively deflationary, which is also a way of saying that the value of the asset has gone up and up. And I believe that attention, which again, the language supports this view of it as a type of a currency, you pay attention, is similarly going through that huge deflationary phase. Ben, like you said, it's something that's been happening for at least a couple of 100 years. But like with many things, I think it's accelerating, right? And obviously with the rise of AI, that's another deflationary wave for attention because the more things you can make, the more content you can generate, the more ideas you can share, that is increasing demand for attention because there's no point creating content. Like we're making a podcast. If no one listens to our podcast, like I love the conversation, but there's no point publishing the thing, right? We want people to listen to it, but they've got more and more podcasts to listen to. They've got more and more other things to do with their attention. And so the value of that attention keeps going up. It's in a deflationary spiral. And what that means is if you are paying attention, the value of each unit of attention is going up and up and up. And so if you are trying to capture someone's attention, the cost that you are paying is also going up and up, right? You can afford to buy less attention. And I don't just mean in the narrow sense of advertising, right? I just think more broadly is you need to capture people's attention more quickly. You need to get your message across more succinctly, because ain't nobody got time to spend an hour to decide whether something is worth their attention. You need to get them pretty early.
You know, the podcast, for example, here, I don't think you and Chris are doing it to become super famous podcasters as the next Joe Rogans. But the reason you're doing the podcast is because by the lessons that you're teaching here or the people that you're interviewing, you could change someone's life. It might be the difference between failure and success for someone. And that has a rippling effect across everything. And so that's why you make content. It's not about yourselves. It's about the cause and the idea and helping people. And that's what attention for the right things and the right cause and the right ideas can do.
And that's sort of the point is, although you can say, well, we're doing it for the love of the craft, we like having these conversations, it's entertaining, we learn a lot. The point of being a podcast is to have an audience, right? No audience, no podcast, really. So it is about capturing people's attention. And yeah, we've talked about this in a previous episode. It's nearly, you can call it like the TikTokization of everything, right? Which is that the amount of time you have to capture people's attention keeps getting less and less and less and less. And that's the world that everyone's dealing with.
Ben, I really like two of those things you just said really well. One is it's not about you, it's about your cause. And therefore, it's really noble. It's noble to pursue attention. It's a good thing. And I think that's really important for people who are introverts or people who are in communities that are less kind to attention seekers or attention getters. I think that's a really key reason to switch your mindset. All right, guys, so let's switch to why is attention getting hard? Why is it hard to get? And why is it hard to keep?
We as human beings are hardwired to pay attention to new and novel experiences. Think about how you might be sitting at a bar, and if you see a bunch of clowns come out of a tiny car, you're going to pay attention. Why? Because we are hardwired to see new things as either food or threat. When our ancestors of the past saw rustle in the leaves and the grass, it could have been a tiger about to eat you, or it was your next meal. We still have the same biological hardwiring, but now we live in a world where a saber-toothed tiger is not going to eat you off the street anytime soon. And so instead, our attention gets captured by different things that cause the dopamine hit. Your push notifications on your smartphone, the next TikTok, the next thing to be offended about in the news, the next world crisis. And it's because like our brains need that kind of stimuli and are hardwired to go look for it. This is why it's easy to get addicted to your smartphone or to get addicted to cable news or whatever else it might be, which makes it harder for you as a founder with an idea to get across a new idea in a world where there's a lot of new ideas. And frankly, maybe an idea that doesn't sound as sensational as everything is burning to the ground, I must be angry about something, or whatever crazy thing is happening in the world or in the news or in a person's life immediately. I want to remind everyone, our biology does not change over the span of a decade. The world has changed. There were no smartphones. This is a brand new device that has completely changed the way we and our children pay attention. And our biology will take thousands of years to go and catch up. So it makes it harder and harder. And just the sheer amount of information we have access to now. In the past, you'd have a newspaper and you'd have people to go and have conversations with. Maybe you'd have a small group of news channels. Now you have infinite choice on news channels. You can pick who you follow and which YouTube videos to go and watch. And people go down like a rabbit hole. It's just hard. There's more competition for that attention as a result. And we don't have the biological wiring to handle it. And it results in it just being harder and harder and harder. I'll also add that now there's much more startups. There is more interest in tech. I think, Chris, when you and I started in tech, it felt like a smaller industry because it was a smaller industry. And there were less startups and there were less venture capitalists and there were less people in it. Now there's so many more startups and there's a much more robust ecosystem for funding things. But it's also just more competition. And it's easier than ever to build the first version of your idea and go out and pitch. And so the end result is, you could pull probably any VC who's been in the business for a decade or more, and they're going to tell you they just see a multitude more pitches and decks and ideas than they did a decade ago. And that number is going to only increase with every year, with every month. Now you have AI to go and help you build pitches. Now you have AI to help you build the first version of your app, the second version of your app.
It's actually a really great illustration of some of the things we're saying here, which is that the bottleneck or the challenge has moved, right? It used to be really hard to create software. It used to be really hard to build a startup. So the hard bit, in a sense, was actually doing the thing, and there weren't that many people doing it. And every time people say, oh, it's never been easier to start a startup, 100% true. But down the other end, the number of successful startups has gone up much more slowly than the number of startups being founded. So in a sense, the hard bit has gone from building the thing to getting enough attention, to being noticed enough to get through that valley of death and actually become a real business. That is the world that we're in. And that's kind of what we really want to talk about today.
I will add, attention is also its own like vortex. Google has a lot of attention and continues to get a lot of attention for anything it goes and launches. Apple, Facebook, Meta, Microsoft, whatever it is. We are seeing an era where big tech is able to launch more things and is able to suck more gravity. And the end result also is it's harder for you to get attention for your ideas when there are really established players that already have lots of attention.
So the other thing that you mentioned, Ben, that I think is worth exploring here is, like you said, our biology has not changed. The world around us has changed. And our sort of dopamine system has kind of been hacked and overpowered by all the information and all the palatability of it. I'm definitely in middle age now, and it's very easy to get a bit sort of old man yells at cloud. And, it's annoying that everything has to be kind of sensationalized. You have such a short period to capture people's attention. But I think the important thing you've said here is like, that is the game that's on the field now, right? And so in a sense, and we'll come to the sort of the solutioning stage of this discussion soon, is you don't have that much time to get people's attention now. You have to compete on the playing field that you're on. It's fundamentally different. So even if you wanted to have like, a French salon style discursive pitch that takes 4 hours, well, you're not going to have that opportunity. You need to think about how do you succeed in capturing people's attention in this hyper-competitive marketplace. And whether you like it or not, that's the world we're in.
We see this on the podcast, right? If you release an episode titled 10 Ways to Be a Better Founder, you'll get fewer clicks than 10 ways you're going to fail. And so these moderate headlines, moderate voices get drowned out, which is driving polarization. It's driving people to get a little bit more desperate. And as we've all been talking about, an overabundance of supply. There are more platforms for media, more content on those platforms. Now it's easier than ever to build a company, and AI is making all of this much, much worse. It's hard, and I think that's pretty darn clear on all dimensions.
Over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Dovetail, FlowHealth, and Quora all use Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. Why aren't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
So the next question, boys, is what are the tricks to cut through this difficulty, to cut through this noise, to become signal that people notice and keep noticing to the benefit of you, your mission, your noble cause, and to your startup?
The multi-billion-dollar question for everyone, huh?
All right, and with that, we'll wrap it up and move right on.
Everyone who just listened to the last 17 seconds of removed audio is now going to be a multi-billionaire. I've solved this problem. I'm actually doing this podcast from my flying mega yacht over the Pacific Ocean. I mean, look, there's no easy way to go and tackle the problem. I will start from the framework I did for my book. I talked about 7 core triggers that capture our attention, no matter your culture or society or anything like that. And they help you capture attention at these different stages. Automaticity, our automatic reaction to certain sights, sounds, and colors because of our hardwired biology. In most cultures, for example, red is related to romanticism. As an example, if you are on a date with the opposite gender and you wear the color red, on average, that person will sit 6 inches closer to you. That's just in the scientific fact. And there's just all these like hardwiring kind of things. What does that mean for you? That means the way you design your website, the way you design your calls to actions, your buttons, has a tremendous impact on the future of your business. Amazon figured out that yellow and orange should be their call to action colors for their buy now buttons. And that actually had a tremendous impact on their business decades ago. And they did meticulous testing on that. And this is the kind of meticulous testing you have to do if you're a founder and you're especially selling a consumer company. Second one, I'm not going to be able to go over everything. That's an entire book. You can go get it, Captivology and everything. Second is framing. It's how a frame of reference and how you view the world. Politics is the obvious one right now. Whether you are, in the America at least, a Republican or a Democrat, really frames your view of the world. And so you have to know the frame of reference of your target customer And it might be like, what's their actual problems? What are they trying to solve? What's the actual thing that they think about all day? Because what they actually think about all day may not actually be what you think they think about all day. This is where interviewing your customers and really understanding their frame of reference really matters. Disruption, we kind of talked about. That's the third trigger. We pay attention to things that violate our expectations, like the clowns coming out of the clown car. You have to find a way to violate people's expectations if you want them to pay attention to you. And that might be a crazy campaign. That might be an ad. That might be something else. There's legendary stories we could talk about in Silicon Valley. I remember there was a major payments company at the PayPal conference. They just like had a giant block of ice of money right in front of the convention center. And people paid attention. People wrote stories about it. And that led to more press. There's things like that you want to be able to do. Reward. That's the fourth one. We pay attention to rewards, whether they're intrinsic or extrinsic. This is like food, money, or things like self-satisfaction or purpose. There's ways to really build that into the product. This is a whole science. It can write multiple books about this specific one. Duolingo is a great example of this, where they have streaks, and people really want to have like streaks of like they've done their lessons every day and they don't want to break their streaks, and that creates stickiness in the product. And those things really do matter when you're trying to build stickiness into a product. Reputation, we really pay attention to experts, authority figures, and the crowd. This is why Yelp works. This is why you have to get reviews for your company. This is why you have to get endorsements from people who are not yourself for your product if you're a B2B company, for example. Mystery, we pay attention to things that are incomplete and mysteries and want to complete storylines. That's why we care about Game of Thrones or whichever things like that. And you want to be able to tell a compelling story where like people want to be part of that. And acknowledgement, which is the last one, the most powerful trigger, which is we pay attention to people and things that pay attention to us and provide us with validation and empathy. And this is why people go on a product like Facebook or TikTok or whatever it might be. But this is why people care about products that speak and resonate with them. And this is why people care about Taylor Swift to the ends of the earth, because she provides them with validation and empathy. She'll give gifts to her fans on Christmas called Swiftmas, and she'll give it to a few fans. But because she does that, all of her fans feel like they got a gift as well. It's the whole parasocial relationship. That's the 7 triggers. I went long, but I'm giving that framing because those are some of the things you could think about when you're thinking about how do I actually capture attention for my startup or idea. It really matters what stage you're at. Are you at the very beginning, or are you trying to build loyalty? The triggers you use will change based off of that.
I was actually going to ask about the stage thing, Ben, because I think, you've talked about people like Taylor Swift or companies like Apple who have this massive reserve and store of attention. It's nearly like attentional inertia. And it's a question of how do they capitalize on it and how do they maintain it? That's very different from the 0 to 1, like no one is paying attention to you and you just want someone to notice you, right? And like, I think in general, one mistake that a lot of founders make is to take a good strategy that is not appropriate for their stage. A strategy that works if you're a larger company and try to apply it to what you're doing now. And I think that's true also for capturing attention. So if you're a founder at a relatively early stage, which I'd say is, a majority of the folks who listen to this podcast, and you are trying to get attention for your pitch or for your product or for the fact that you exist and you want people to apply to work at your company, the best people. Of those techniques, what are the ones that you would focus on as being most effective at that stage?
At the earlier stages, you're talking about disruption, probably your biggest one, disruption and automaticity. Example that came to mind from the book years ago, this company called Scopely. They really wanted to recruit engineers. It was hard to recruit engineers. So they made a special offer of if you join us in this time period and we bring you in. They did a parody of the Most Interesting Man in the World ad campaign with the beer and all that. And they gave beer and they did an oil painting of you, among other things. That broke through the noise. That got press. People applied in droves because that also says something about the culture of the company. That's that's interesting. That's cool. They're thinking differently. I want to be involved in something like that. And so disruption is probably your most important tool and trick. And look, to be clear, there's some base road things that you have to do in the beginning in order to capture attention. You have to have a great product. You have to have, make it easy to go and use. You have to do the cores of marketing, which tend to be things, whether it's outbound or ads, email marketing, or all those other kinds of things. But you can enhance all those things by having something that stands out a little bit compared to the rest of your competition, and something that they'll buzz about and go and talk about. What that exactly is, you know your industry better than I do, but you have to figure out what's going to make you stand out a little bit and take a little bit of risk, because truth is, Like, no one knows you in the scheme of things. No one knows your company in the vast scheme of the universe. You're really not losing anything trying something a little bit more off the wall or trying something different. You gotta have something where, I remember when I said attention is memory. If I'm getting a pitch, for example, from a founder, I need to have like in my head, what's the one idea or two ideas that I'm gonna take away? And it better be like, oh, that founder's extraordinary because they did this one thing, and their product's extraordinary because it has this one crazy effect or this one crazy traction item or whatever else it might be. What's the thing that's gonna stick in their brain like a thorn in your finger in a good way?
I love those thorns in my finger in a good way.
You want to be sticky.
So one of the things we did at Uber when it was also really hard to recruit and land engineers and talent in general is when they made it through our recruitment process and we wanted to hire them, we would send them the offer letter and then we would let their team know that we had done that. And we would encourage the team to share their earnest and real enthusiasm for that candidate to join the team. And we would share their email address. And so the team would, what we used to call it a love bomb. So the team would all individually and authentically email the new candidate, go, cannot wait for you to join. I heard this and that about you. Hey, if you need any help about anything, feel free to reach out, et cetera, et cetera. And we would just kind of flood the candidate's inbox with a lot of love, a lot of care, and a lot of enthusiasm. It was done to me, not knowing what's going on. You're like, wow, this company, these people are really nice. I can't wait to meet them. And it just feels completely personal and completely spontaneous and completely awesome. And it would really tip the scales to have that candidate who we spent a lot of money interviewing, recruiting, bringing in through the process. It would help maximize the chances that they would sign the contract and join the company.
Perfect example of acknowledgement.
You also talked about that first one. What is it?
Automaticity. It's the most mouthful of the triggers.
Yeah, automaticity. That's right. You know, there's this rumor, there's this story of how Marissa Mayer, who was head of Google Search, would test every shade of blue on the homepage of Google to see what would generate more traffic or more clicks. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but the point is that she would optimize down to the shades, down to the hex codes. And she would, just A/B test these things all day long. Because, of course, Google's already at scale and it comes down to fractions of a percent. And so short of going all the way from like red will make people sit closer to you, Ben, down to the shade of red, which will get them to click just that percent more. And that's how crazy someone like Marissa Mayer, who used to set up Google, can go with it.
I will note being crazy is a common theme among some great founders. And I would call it not crazy. I'd call it not even determination. It is obsession. And obsession can be a really good thing in certain cases as a founder. You have to know when to let it go. Even if you don't have a lot of traffic, there's a lot of A/B testing you can do. Great founders often A/B test their messaging using ads to figure out like what are people resonating with more in my target audience, and then use that to help figure out what the taglines need to be as a specific example.
Actually, I want to talk about that in more detail, Ben, because it's really important. So this is called value prop testing, and this is actually a very pragmatic way of getting and keeping attention, which is really relevant to this section. Value prop testing is it takes marketing and messaging out of the realm of taste and judgment and creativity into the realm of science to a degree. And so, you can come up with the 17 or 20 or 30 things that you think might be reasons to believe or reasons to use your product. And for each of those, maybe come up with 5 or 10 different tones of voice or approaches. And that gives you kind of a matrix of some hundreds, potentially, of things to say. And you can run ads for all of those and see which one gets people to click the most. And that is a really good way of testing what phraseology, what value, what lens on your product is the one that really drives attention and drives clicks and engagement. So that's a very practical, pragmatic thing that great founders do. I think even sometimes before they even have a product or anything much to show at all. And you click on the ad and you sign up to a mailing list for something that doesn't exist. And that's a good way to test things.
There's another thing that a hypothesis that I'd love to run past you, Ben, and get your thoughts on it. And I guess the analogy again here is with the life cycle of a startup and the multiple rounds of funding that you raise. Again, I'm leaning into this idea of attention as currency. If you've got a startup idea and you've done a little bit of testing, you don't go out to market and raise a Series D, right? You're not like, hey, I want 500 mil at a $2 billion valuation for this great thing. No, you raise a pre-seed and then you do a bit of work and you build enough credibility that you can raise a seed and then a Series A and so on. So there's this iterative validation, right? Where you say, I am going to show that I'm worth funding at a higher level again and again until I reach that escape velocity. My view is something quite similar that happens with attention, which is why I was asking you about the 0 to 1, right? Which is before you earn the right to 4 hours of someone's attention, you need to have earned the right to 1 hour of their attention. Before you earn the right to 1 hour of attention, it's 15 minutes. Before it's 15 minutes, it's 1 minute. Before it's 1 minute, it's 4 seconds as they're scrolling on their LinkedIn feed or whatever it is. And so that's one of the things that I've sort of made my peace with things like the hooks. You talked about the thorn in the finger. Like sometimes you need to be quite sensationalist. You need to do something to stand out, because before you have the opportunity to have a long form discussion and, really get people to dial in their attention, you need just a few seconds. You only have a few seconds. And what do you do with that? And so by definition, that's going to have to be a bit sensationalist. Do you agree with that sort of framing?
There's more than one way to get through the door and get more time. Sensationalist, the disruption trigger is one way. Another is through the reputation trigger. So specifically look, if I get an intro to a great company from you or Chris or from one of our limited partners or from a top VC that I respect, or especially from one of our portfolio founders, I'm going to spend the time to sit down and have that conversation, because I implicitly trust them and their reputation, and them making introduction means something. And so I'm going to pay attention. You're at a random conference or something. Yeah, you're going to have to pull out a little bit more of the stops. But someone's like, hey, I'm really good friends with X and I worked at AI at Meta and I'm working on a whole new thing. I'm going to listen too, because there's some validation happening here. There's some reputation pieces. If you were good enough to be hired and worked on AI at Meta, for example, you're most likely not selling me snake oil, or at least there's something for me to go and listen to. So there's a couple of ways to go into it. You have to choose your own path, but it can't just be, I deserve 2 hours of your time. It's so frustrating. So you can capture attention lots of different ways. If you build the right reputation too, then it gets easier and easier over time. It compounds. And the reason for that is because it's a shortcut for us, for someone who's super busy, whether it's an investor like me or a journalist or someone else at the top of their field, to figure out what to pay attention to, because you get 100 pitches. Who are the 5 you're going to get on the phone with that day?
I think maybe it's worth talking about bad ways of getting attention as well, because you just gave a good example there, Ben. And I think different people have different triggers or different, sensitivities. But some stuff that I see founders doing all the time that bugs the hell out of me is random LinkedIn connection requests with no explanation, or the explanation of, hey, I would love to add you to my network. And I'm like,
oh my God.
Why? I don't know you.
It's sales. It's bad sales. It's
really
horrible
bad
sales.
Or, hey, I'd love to catch up for a 15-minute coffee. Well, a 15-minute coffee is an hour of my life, right? I got to put on my pants, drive to where you are, have a coffee with you, whatever.
Chris doesn't even put on his pants for this podcast.
Exactly.
We called Chris Pantsless Saad. That was his nickname in the early San Francisco days.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
And so, or I want to pick your brain. I'm sure you want to pick my brain. Everybody wants to pick my brain, with respect. But what is it you're doing? Give me 5 bullets and let's connect on Zoom for, 15, 20, 30 minutes. Let's talk about it, in a low friction, high density environment where I can quickly connect to the next call, and give me some context about what the hell is going on. And so I think those are good examples. Another is, just a really obvious bad example of trying to get attention is just using yellow flags or red flags in terms of jargon. For me, one of my bugbears is the phrase, I'm looking for a financial partner rather than an investor. To me, that feels like, what the hell does that mean? Learn the jargon. It sounds gatekeepery. It sounds, trivial or petty. But if you don't know enough or haven't read enough to simply know some of the basic vocabulary of looking for an investor, or working in tech versus IT. These things kind of drive me crazy. That's just immediately yellow flags. And so you just want to get all of these yellow and red flags out of the way so that getting attention is free of distraction. The probabilities are higher that the person you're reaching out to is not going to kind of dismiss your signal.
Couple things. One, this is why I tell someone who's just coming out of college, should I go start a company or should I go join a company? If you don't have the critical idea, even if you do, I almost always recommend go join a company. Unless you already have traction for some reason, go join a company, because product management is not a course that's taught at most colleges. It's something you learn in the trenches. And to be a great founder, you have to be a great product manager. How do you do that? You go to a company and you learn that, which also teaches you the jargon and teaches you how the process works and teaches you to be better. Especially if you join a startup, you could learn from the founder and you could learn how they pitch. And by osmosis, when you eventually go out to pitch, you're going to be 80 times better and have a better financial situation when you're going out to fundraise and starting a company and you have to pay yourself well below market rate. And that's like a reason to go do it. There is also such a thing as too much jargon. Like I see pitches just like you do, Chris, was like, I have a B2B AI crypto solution as a service. I had one of these and they bolded every buzzword they used. I was like, no.
They just filled out your buzzword bingo card. That's why they bolded it, to make it easy, right?
They literally just filled out a buzzword bingo, and that does not work. That is we'll call it a yellow flag. There's like a middle ground there. You have to know your audience. The same thing if you're pitching in sales. You have to know the lingo of your target customer. You learn that by talking to those customers, by reading books, by being in that industry. This is why VCs care so much about what we call founder market fit. This is something I actually learned. It was a lesson taught to me by one of the founders of Y Combinator, by Paul Graham, during my Mashable days. He told me that when he was evaluating companies, he would think to himself, if I were to put together like a dream team to go after this idea, would it be the team in front of me? You know, Social Cam was a perfect example, the Instagram for video that sold to Autodesk. The founders were the creators of Twitch. Perfect people to go and build an Instagram for video, have like the perfect experience for it. Yes, I will go and back them. That makes sense. And so you see lots of pitches all the time for someone trying to tackle medical, and there's no medical expert on the team. That's not going to end well. You're going to have a really difficult time fundraising and really difficult time building a company because you don't know the ins and outs and the jargon and the language, and it takes years to learn it in specific industries. So just emphasizing your points, Chris, because you're absolutely right.
Let me talk about the counter argument, right? So a lot of what we just said, especially you and I, Ben, can sound like a boys' club, cliquey, gatekeeping, and it can feel like incumbents have a massive advantage and there's no way to break it. And I think we need to go back to what you were saying, Ben, which is to do something disruptive, out of the ordinary, clowns getting out of a car. You need to bring on advisors who are maybe 1 or 2 or 3 degrees of separation from the inner circle you're trying to get to. You need to recruit co-founders and employees who have the inside track on what you're working on. You need to think creatively. So the last thing that we want to leave you with is the impression that unless you're already on the inside, you can't get or wield attention. But you need to, as Yaniv said, think about it as kind of an exponential curve. You need to get that first 4 seconds to get that next 1 minute, to get that next 20 minutes, to get that next hour. Similarly, you need to get that first advisor, to get access to that next founder, to get that intro to that VC. You need to work your way up the attention hierarchy, up the concentric circles towards the inner circle, up the value chain towards, higher valuations. It is a ladder. Chaos is a ladder, as Littlefinger said in Game of Thrones.
I was about to say you were about to Game of Thrones me, weren't you?
Yeah, exactly. And so you need to work your way through this attention hierarchy and work at it the same way you work on your features, the same way you work on your team, the same way you work, hopefully, on yourself. It is a difficult but very valuable exercise in paying attention, to wielding it well, and to honing that craft over time. And I will admit for myself, a craft that I think I'm terrible at. I will write something up and throw it out on LinkedIn without paying too much attention to the headline or to the tone of voice or to the how emotional is this. And, I will regularly admit or accept a request to do something without kind of trading for a reciprocal piece of scarce attention. And I will regularly see friends and colleagues who are much more adept, and I'll say much more ruthless, at trading their attention much more carefully. It's a skill that I think is one that I need to get better at, and I think that founders in general need to be aware of.
I want to go back to that first 4 seconds, right? Which is, I think there's a few things here that all come together. We were talking about getting the right technical terminology, the right jargon, and all of these other things. So remember, when you've got 4 seconds of people's attention, again, that's a very small unit of that currency. You need to spend it incredibly wisely. Those 4 seconds, the other thing about them is the default position is reject. Most people, they'll spend their 4 seconds of attention on you, and unless something really resonates with them, they'll move on to the next thing, to spend their 4 seconds on the next thing. So people are looking for reasons to reject you, right? If you use the wrong terminology, that shows that you're signaling that you don't have the credentials, right? And I think that's one of the things that you haven't done your homework. Also, if you're boring or if you're just not calling people's attention to the right thing, they will move on. They'll move on. And so that's why it's so important. But Chris, to your point, perhaps that you don't invest as much in that first 4 seconds as maybe you could. I reflect on our experience with this podcast, right? We operate kind of on 2 channels. One is the sort of regular old RSS podcast channel, where people find us slowly, normally through recommendations from their friends. And, most people listen through most of the episode. But now we're also on YouTube. And on YouTube, people don't know who we are. Most of the listens or watches we get there are through the recommendation algorithm. And so what's called packaging, right? Like the thumbnail and the title becomes super, super important. And like I said, it's easy to get a bit boomerish about that and say, kids these days, why should I spend so much time figuring out the right thumbnail? That's because they've got hundreds of thumbnails and they'll just move on if your one doesn't catch their interest and attention straight away. And so they say that 50% of the time you spend on YouTube should be on what's called the packaging, which is the thumbnail and the title and other little things, and only 50% on creating the content. That is because so many more people spend the 4 seconds on you than will ever get through that funnel and actually watch your video. And so that is where the highest leverage is. And I think that lesson is actually really broad, whether it's a pitch deck, whether it's your landing page, whether it's the first sign-up page for your product. You've got a very little window of people's attention. You absolutely should be over-investing in making the most of it, and hardly anybody does it well.
So what you're saying, Yaniv, is that our audience today needs to respect and honor the Startup Podcast Pact and give us a shout out on their favorite social network. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely right. Why do we do that? That's actually a great lesson there, right?
I got a different lesson, which is that the 2 of you need to lock yourselves into a house for 30 days with limited food and the lights on and see if you can survive, and have a guy named Mr. Beast just torture you for the entire time, and that will get you listeners. That's what I heard.
We want to be the Mr. Beast of niche founder podcasts.
We should do some kind of Fear Factor startup podcast thing where where it's dangerous to listen. That would be pretty awesome.
We locked 15 founders in a load for 3 weeks. See what happens. Look, I have to go talk to my agent at UTA about that one.
I thought you were serious again. I gotta go. I gotta talk to my agent, guys. I'm running out of time for this.
You think I'm kidding? I do have an agent at UTA, and I might have to go and think about this one. So I will go ponder this in a dark room somewhere.
I'd watch it.
See, if anyone else would want to watch it, let me know on social media so I can put all of your tweets into a packet and I can sell that to CNBC.
Are there other words of wisdom you have here for founders about how to really master attention?
You can't get attention for a crappy product. Let's just be clear about that first. Bad product, bad idea, no matter how much attention you give to it, won't work. Validate your ideas, validate your product. This is why product market fit matters so much. And oftentimes when you think you have product market fit, you probably don't quite yet. It's when you start to see escape velocity, people are telling each other, and that's when you can really put the gas on capturing attention. In the early days, your job is to get enough attention to validate product market fit. Once you've gotten product market fit, your job is to create scalable ways to capture attention. And the way you speak about your product, the way that you pitch, the channels that you use, the messaging and the marketing that you employ, all those things really matter, but it's different at different stages. At the end though, you have to have the right product for the right market. And if you just throw a bunch of attention at the wrong product in the wrong market, you will see the result, and it is called churn. And churn is your greatest enemy.
Actually, Ben, that's a really, really good point. The final anti-pattern, I guess, is founders who do nothing but seek attention. So these founders are on every podcast, they're at every event. We used to say he'll go to the opening of a chip packet. These founders have no product, no team, no traction, no real value utility, but they're at every event. They're at every community activity. They're at everything. And they're not focused on their product and their business enough. And so I guess the final anti-pattern, to put a button on this episode about attention, is what Ben said, is initially you just need enough attention to validate some early ideas and to prove that your product works. And then and only then, once you've figured that out, then you want to scale, keyword being scale your attention for your product in a sustainable and useful way. All right, Ben, this has been super interesting, super useful. Obviously, people should run out immediately to their local Amazon store and buy your book right off the shelf, not on Amazon.com, at a physical book.
Wait, run to your local Amazon store.
Yeah, run to your local Amazon store and buy the book. But other than buying your book, Captivology, The Science of Getting and Keeping Attention, how else can they reach you and follow your work?
I am at Ben Parr, BenParr, on literally every social network. Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, you name it. I have an account there. benparr.com is probably the best one. My newsletter, The AI Analyst. Also, the newest updates and some cool announcements and some other stuff. And I definitely talk about the book sometimes too. And the book, yes, it's just search Captivology. In whichever bookstore you have, it's translated into lots of languages all across the world.
You're very effective at capturing and keeping attention there, Ben. That's fantastic. And Yaniv, how can people find you?
I'm mostly just on LinkedIn these days, trying to make it a bit less boring. And actually, if I get a connection request from a TSP listener and you let me know, I don't consider that a random connection request. I love it. So hit me up. Let me know how much you love the pod. I'm happy to accept your connection. And Chris, how about you?
I'm also on LinkedIn. Give me a follow there. Feel free to subscribe to my newsletter over at chrissaad.com/newsletter and learn more about my advisory work over at chrissaad.com/advisory. All right, guys. Great pod as always. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Ben. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Today's episode of the Startup Podcast was brought to you by Vanta. Vanta automates compliance for SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more, saving you time and money while helping you build customer trust. Plus, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center, all powered by Vanta AI. Over 7,000 global companies already use Vanta. Why don't you? Get $1,000 off Vanta when you go to vanta.com/TSP. That's VANTA.com/TSP for the Startup Podcast to get $1,000 off.
It's a skill that I think is one that I need to get better at, and I think that founders in general need to be aware of.
Sorry, man. I tuned out halfway through what you were saying, to be honest.
For a second there, I thought you were serious, and I was like, what the